Hello, Bentley Compost Guy Christy here, and this is going to be a bit of an update on my Easy Worm Mix bins. If you have been watching the last few videos that I've been doing, you may be familiar with what I'm talking about. Back in March, I started up a plastic worm bin, just something that looked kind of like that, with a bag of this worm mix called Easy Worm Mix that I sell up here in Canada. And from there, things kind of expanded out. I split the bin quite soon after I started it up. I was pretty active with feeding both of the bins for the first little while with food waste. And then later on I did some experiments with grass thatch, as you may recall, and that actually went really well. The worms absolutely loved the thatch. It's what I refer to as a living material, and has lots of beneficial microbes, great for mixing with food waste, and it also serves a sort of habitat value as well, so it's really handy material to use. Well, after that, I basically neglected these bins. I left them to sit. I didn't worry about feeding them. And what's nice about a plastic bin like that, if you have lots of bedding in it and you're keeping it in a fairly moderate temperature location, not in direct sunlight, anything like that, it can just go and go for months, and the worms can thrive, really thrive. And that's basically what happened. I left it go all the way until middle of June, I would say. And at that point I decided that I wanted to start a sort of harvesting process. It's a bit early, I haven't been feeding that much, so typically I would probably be more actively feeding bins that I wanted to harvest from. But just for the sake of the experiment, I decided that I did want to start the harvesting process. So at that point, what I did was I dumped the material out from the two bins into a mixing tub that looks kind of like this. I mean, one of these tubs, that exact tubs. These are among my favorite of worm composting tools, actually. Very handy. So dump both of them out into one of these tubs, and I will likely insert some pictures showing you what that looked like. And showing you some of the densities of worms that I was finding, absolutely loaded with worms. And then left it to sit. That's the thing with a plastic bin, you really need to let it air out. You can't, you could dig material right out of a bin and put it in your potted plants, that's fine. But if you really want to have a good harvest of a nice vermicompost, some of the stuff I'm going to be showing you in a minute, you want to provide it with a sort of curing period and a drying period. And what's nice about this is that you leave the worms alone. Again, definitely not going to be feeding them at this point. They're going to continue to process the material that they've already got, and so you can end up with even more of the compost, and it's going to be that nice drier consistency. So I left that to sit, and it's been quite a while. The thing with these bins is they retain so much moisture, it can really take a while to dry everything out. So I recommend mixing a lot. Make sure it's an open bin, something like this, or just even a tub that's open. Mixing a lot, getting a lot of airflow in there. If you can put it in a location that's fairly dry, that's obviously going to help. Outside in the shade somewhere where it's windy and fairly warm, that can definitely accelerate the process. I was very casual about it. I just left it down in my basement, and it's now been probably close to 3 weeks since I dumped it out, and I finally decided, okay, I better make a video about this and kind of show you what I've been doing. So it's pretty good consistency at this point. Again, like I said, I didn't feed the systems all that much, so there's a lot of coarse, unprocessed material. And what you see in front of you, I should probably tell you what we're looking at here, are 3 different fractions, essentially. Right in the middle is where the vast majority of the worms are, definitely the vast majority of the adult worms. That's sort of where I've been harvesting the compost from. And basically all I did was just gradually put it in a bright location, basic light harvesting method, scraping away the material from the top and putting it into a bin that looked like this. You know, I got down to this point, and remember it was 2 bins worth that went into this tub, so it was definitely a much higher volume at one point, and I got quite a bit into this bin. And then what I did today was, you know, after letting that kind of sit and dry for a while, I started screening it. A very, very simple, basic screen, very, very easy to make. Just make a wooden frame, and this is 1/4 inch hardware fabric, I think they call it. Hardware, it's sort of a weird name. It doesn't sound like what it is, but a screening essentially. It's just 1/4 inch in size, and I actually did some with an 1/8 of an inch other little screener that I happen to have, just to kind of show you the difference. I don't recommend that, especially not with plastic bin vermicompost. It tends to be a bit soft and gooey even after you let it dry for a while. Something like a worm bin or a verm bin, some sort of flow-through system, an 1/8 of an inch could work quite well. Okay, so I screened out, took this really, really coarse stuff, put it over top of that, just put that harvester on top of a tray like this. You just shake it, works very, very quickly, very, very easy. And I ended up with some stuff that looked just like that. So that is the 1/4 inch material. This, you can see, like I said, is the 1/8 of an inch, just a small amount that I did, just to kind of show you. Very, very beautiful, rich material. This is fantastic vermicompost. And it's pretty cool that we do have all this stuff, even though I didn't actively feed the bin very much after a certain point. This stuff, you can see, is obviously a bit more coarse. And there are small worms still in here. And that's not going to stress me out too much. The one thing that might stress people out is that these bins, these plastic bins with lots of bedding, you end up with an unbelievable number of cocoons in them. And this compost you're seeing in front of you is absolutely loaded in cocoons. This stuff has actually got a lot of them as well, and that stresses some people out. I can understand. You know, for me personally, I have these integrated vermigardening systems, I call them, outside. There's lots of composting worms integrated in with the gardening environment. And so I don't worry about it, because any worm that's going to hatch out or any worm that's left in here is going to find a safe habitat to go and live in. In a typical soil environment, it's not quite the same. These are not soil worms, so they're not going to live really, really easily in a typical soil. So I can sort of see why some people would be concerned. One thing you can try is you can extend this over an even longer period, and you can actually put something like a melon, a cantaloupe, anything that'll lure the worms, and just leave it. And eventually you'll get this congregation of smaller hatchlings. Some of these other cocoons are going to hatch out, and you can transfer all those little tiny worms into a vermicomposting system. So that's one way to kind of deal with the cocoon situation. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to screen them out. The cocoons are fairly small. Even this 1/8 of an inch stuff, like I said, there's lots and lots of cocoons in there. So you're not going to really be able to screen out the cocoons. But, you know, very, very nice material. Over here, this is what I would refer to as a living material. Now, a lot of people would see this and be sort of frustrated. Be like, oh, look at all this wasted stuff. You know, this isn't really good compost. It's unprocessed. You know, the worms didn't do a good job. But this stuff is worth its weight in gold, you know, in its own right. You could use it as a coarse compost, you know, maybe for a shrub or, you know, something that that could benefit from something, higher carbon ratio kind of a compost, like more of a mulch maybe. But I recommend keeping this stuff and using it as a living material for your next setup. This is from a vermicomposting system loaded with beneficial microorganisms. You just mix it in with your food waste, and you're really, really going to accelerate the process. And the worms are going to come back, they're going to keep processing this stuff. Don't worry if you're seeing this stuff that's unprocessed. It is going to break down over time. And you keep recycling it through your system, and you're going to see much faster, better results than you would in a sort of sterile environment without all those beneficial microbes. So this is fantastic stuff. I'm always excited to have lots of that. The actual worm zone, you should probably take a look at that. As you can see, it's beautiful, rich. When you leave them alone, the worms continue. I actually had a plastic bag over this. They just continue to work at the material that's in there. And you can see this is absolutely loaded with beautiful vermicompost. I'm not finished. I just wanted to make this video kind of showing what was going on, but I could get a lot more really nice stuff. And this stuff, I could screen this down really, really nicely. It's because the worms there's a ton of worms under here, and they are just continuing to just blast away at all this bedding. I actually did, because I was leaving it so long, I just put some food waste just for fun on top of here, put a plastic bag over top, a garbage bag, and the worms just went to town on the material that I added, and they basically processed all of it. And so they have been fed a bit more, but yeah, this is really, really nice stuff. I'm just going to show you what I'm talking about with the worms here. Again, this started with what I refer to as my easy worm mix. This is a mix that I sell here that has lots and lots of cocoons, lots of juvenile worms, but it's not pounds of worms. But it's still very, very effective for starting up worm bins. Now look at that, look at that. Absolutely loaded. And you can see some of the thatch, maybe you can't, but some of the thatch is still in there. It forms a beautiful habitat material for the worms. And every little dig, sorry for the shaky camera work here, but every little, and there you can probably see more of that now, of that thatch. Every dig through this material is going to result in absolute gobs of worms. So nobody can sit and tell me that starting with something like a worm mix, you're not going to be effective in vermicomposting. You absolutely are. And even, the whole reason I split the bins right off the bat was because there were already so many worms in there. You keep splitting them, and they will expand in number very, very rapidly. And like I said, I completely neglected these worms for a good month and a half, not longer. And if I had actually been feeding them and continuing to expand into new systems, I can only imagine how many worms I would have right now. It'd be very, very interesting. My original plan had been just for fun. Although these are small worms, just given the number of them, just for fun, I wanted to kind of concentrate them to the point where I could actually weigh the biomass of the worms. But, based on the amount of time it would take, I decided that's probably not going to happen. But you can tell. You can tell that there's loads and loads of worms here. I wouldn't be surprised if we're at the point where it's pounds of worms. And unbelievable number of cocoons. When you have carbon-rich bedding materials like paper, shredded cardboard, things like that, for whatever reason, and this has even been documented in academic literature, the worms just go crazy with breeding. And the other thing, they're adapted for life in a changing environment. And when they sense change, when it seems like the habitat's starting to degrade somewhat, they will breed like crazy. They'll start popping cocoons like crazy. And this is the perfect example where I've left them, I've concentrated them to this point, kind of leaving them. It's probably a sort of disturbed environment stimulus for them, and I mean, you can't see them unfortunately, but just digging through this stuff, it's absolutely incredible how many cocoons I'm seeing. I could start any number of different new systems just with what you see in front of you here. It's because it's so loaded with worms and baby worms and cocoons, and it's just a fantastic starter. That's the same thing with this. Although I've screened, you know, truth be told, because a lot of the cocoons ended up over here, maybe not quite as good, but you could start a new system easily with this stuff, and I highly recommend that you are going to be mixing this in with your setup to inoculate it and everything else. But yeah, lots and lots going on here. But that's pretty much it. What I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to do another experiment. I'm going to be working with some rotten hay. I'm curious to know how appealing they will find that. And what I'm going to try to do is get them to move from this zone, from this material, into the rotten hay, the moistened rotten hay. And it may actually prove to be a good way to separate out a lot of the worms from this material, rather than having to continue with this light harvesting approach. I do want to kind of get them into some nice systems rather than leaving them this concentrated. Probably not ideal for them. But that's pretty much it. So hopefully you found this interesting. And yeah, I'll certainly be producing some more videos again pretty soon. Once again, this is Bentley Compost Guy Christie. Thanks for tuning in.